This video is about creating a cast steel texture on plastic model tanks or models with large metal sections. Out of the box, these models can look a little bit toy-like. This will make them look a bit more believable and make them stand out from other models. This technique's a modification on a technique used by scale modelers. The way it's done in scale modelling looks very subtle and realistic, but I think for wargaming figures it's better to have a bit more of an exaggerated effect, and it's always nice to do it with a minimum of materials. This video was originally filmed as part of my Sprue-goo video, so it assumes you are familiar with goo and cement. If you're not, there's a link to that video in the description. Here I've got a leftover model tank turret, and I'm just going to texture this large side panel that's facing us. Doing this will ruin a brush, so we might as well get a cheap brush that's already been used and shape the head so it's perfect for the job. So we just want something with a round flat head that's splayed out. So I start with a thick layer of extra thin cement. This activates the plastic, allowing bits of it to be pulled out, forming pits that go into the surface. That'll supplement the added lumps that come out of the surface. So I'll dip the brush in thin cement, just like dipping it in water when you're painting, and then load it up with goo. So I stipple the model with a stabbing motion, starting in the most prominent areas and then working my way to the edge to try to get a full coverage. Then if I've got time I can go back to those prominent areas and do a second pass. I'd previously used that brush for texture pastes, and you can see there's still some pigment in those bristles that's coming out and staining the goo. Historically, tanks tended to use cast steel plates as side armour, but the roofs and other sections were done with smooth sheet steel. So you can get a lot of variety on your models, and you don't need to feel obligated to texture everything or anything that's difficult to reach. As it goes on, we start getting little cobwebby strings forming between the brush and the model. When we get more than a few of those, it's time to stop. The surface of the goo will form a skin, which if you stipple over that, it will tear in an unnatural way. So it's best to structure the workflow so we get a complete coverage to start with, and only then come back to get a more exaggerated results in those prominent areas. That way we can call it done with short notice. After that, the texture might have a few sharp peaks that could look a little strange, and of course there's those cobwebs still on the surface. So I come back in with a fine grit sandpaper. This is 600 grit. To be honest, I probably did more sanding than was necessary here. And after that, for a little bit more smoothing and to reabsorb that sanding dust, I'll do a thin uniform coat of extra thin cement and leave that to dry a second time. Once everything's dry, we can take a better look at it. Some of those panel lines might have been obscured by the texture, so we can come in and deepen them again with a blade. I'm just using the back corner of quite a chunky blade here. When you're scribing lines in like this, do multiple passes with very low pressure. That way you just have far more control than you would if you did it with one high pressure pass. And for a little extra flavour here, I'm texturing the sides of that panel to make them look like they've been cut with a plasma cutter or an acetylene torch. Just taking that same quite chunky blade and pressing it into the surface there. I'd recommend maybe 2 or 3 of those lines per millimetre. And again, to clean that up, another little bit of cement. I did flood the end piece a little bit here, but we can just dry the end of the applicator brush on a rag and go back and mop that up. When you're painting the figure, the texture will be most visible if you give it a slightly satin finish, but you could exaggerate that by Zenithal highlighting, or giving it a few very dilute washes or light dry brushes. Anyway, that's it for now. Thank you for watching.